Hello friends, today we have a discussion on the American playwright Eugene O'Neill and the play that will be focused upon by our resource person Professor Richa Bajaj, who teaches English in Delhi University's Hindu College, and in this discussion she will be taking up the specific text Long Day's Journey into Night. But definitely it's going to be a discussion on the dramatic practice of the author whom you may have read, at least whose name you might have heard in the discussions, whose references you might have come across in your study of the drama criticism and the associated aspects of drama writing in America as well as in English in general. Let's begin the discussion with a request to Professor Bajaj regarding this person, regarding his time, regarding his nationality specifically, because maybe it's a mixed nationality, and what could be the reason that the nationality is mixed, and of course the name and the words used in the name of the play, because it's a play that poses problems from the time you just hold the book in your hand. There are heavy words in the title, and those words indicate something specific in the American context, and perhaps they will offer a clue to us into the meaning and the message, if there is any, of the play. So let's make this request to Professor Richa Bajaj, who might tell us regarding this author in general, his background, his mood, his intention, his message, if any, and the kind of connect that he would attempt with the audience from the stage. So all these questions are related with one another, and they definitely make us curious about the important information that I suggest. So Professor Bajaj, please begin the discussion about this person in general, and let's know who he is, what he stands for, and things like that.
So as we are discussing Eugene O'Neill, and Eugene O'Neill, especially the play Long Day's Journey into the Night, we find that Eugene O'Neill is really an artist first, an artist and a kind of creating an art drama. So he's a dramatist, of course. In fact, it is often mentioned that it is believed that there was no vital American drama before Eugene O'Neill, and Harold Bloom, in fact, suggests that O'Neill is able to give to America its own form of theatre, its own drama, much like, say, Strindberg and Ibsen in Europe. So he is, in that sense, able to give a kind of authenticity to American drama, which was so far maybe just superfluous and exaggerated in its form.
You use the word art drama. We generally don't bring it into the discussions, and I would like you to explain as to what exactly art drama suggests to us.
In the sense that you could also call it literary drama, if you like, because there is a sense of a literary history which is there which is projected in drama. It is actually very unique, and something very unique about Eugene O'Neill, that because he's so well read and he's aware of the traditions of the 19th century. He's born in 1888, so very much at the fag end of the 19th century, and the 19th century, I believe, is very intellectual in spirit, and the age itself is trying to deal with questions that where answers have not been found. Whether you think of, say, Darwin coming up with his theories, or Freud or Marx and others. Nietzsche, for instance, created an impact at the time, and especially on O'Neill. So you see, he's born at a time when these intellectual currents, intellectual trends are literally clashing with one another, and one is being opposed by the other. So when it comes to his dramatic practice, he is able to bring forth through his characters, who are. And now, interestingly, he talks about, for instance, Long Day's Journey into Night is about an actor, who's an actor with a traveling troupe. So he's a traveling actor. Now, he's obviously very well versed with Shakespeare's plays and quotes, and so his children naturally have a sense about it, and because they've traveled with the family and all of that. Now, the point being that, so that's the setting, but otherwise his characters speak, for instance, they will begin on quoting from Rossetti or Swinburne or Baudelaire, or quote Nietzsche right in the middle, or
Is it an
Shakespeare.
elitist play then, and the 19th century hanging heavy on the writer's mind?
So that's why I called it art drama and literary drama. That because there are so many literary references in the play that that you almost find it's an artist enterprise, and one could take it as a kind of an elitist play, but because of its and at one level it's not elitist. I wouldn't say elitist. It is elitist because they fit the bill, so to speak. When the characters speak them, then there is already a history behind them. So when, for instance, a verse comes in, that verse actually fits in. Now that may be the artistic practice of the writer, and maybe his genius or brilliance in that sense to be able to fit in the scene that particular verse, or it could be an elitist exercise to probably project how much one knows, right, and that it is meant for a particular kind of audience. So that dimension remains, and yet what is important to note is that these poetic utterances of characters, they're not really central. They're immediate in the scene, but they're not central to the theme. At the center is this anguish. Anguish of characters, or their turmoil, or their kind of nightmarish reality that he wants to project. So, because of the genuine intensity of feeling, I think the play doesn't go on in the superficial sort of direction, even though it uses a lot of quotes from here and there, and it becomes a kind of, so it's a treat for somebody who is a part of, who's into the literary circle, but maybe outside, for one who's not probably a literary scholar or not even a reader, it is still about a very genuine search for sustenance.
What is a long day in the title? What is it doing?
So this play is actually about the dreary life of the Tyrone family, and this play is charts the sequence of events of the full day. So the play in a way actually, from the 4 acts, they actually begin from morning, from the time they have breakfast to midnight. So it's a day's journey into night, and literally in that sense that it's a play which is set in a one day life of a family, and gives us view of that one day in the life of that family. And obviously it's an important day when important events take place, but it's just a day in the life of a family. So a normal day perhaps, or an abnormal day within quotes in the family. But the title is also metaphorical because it gives a sense of a varied, dragging on sort of existence that finally moves towards the night, and in this case a kind of tragedy. So
journey means ups and downs and blockades.
In this case, the journey means only falling down. It's the fall. So from the beginning, it moves towards the fall of the night, and the day is long. So it's like a tedious kind of an existence which has been going on, which finally falls and merges with the night. So in the sense, the tragic, that, and also a sense of impending tragedy, in that sense that you expect the night to follow right after the day. And so in a way it's again a kind of a perspective that the writer chooses to talk about the day leading to a night inevitably. So it's almost a sense of helplessness and inevitability with respect to the characters. It is inevitable they are going to fall in the night. They're going to fall in a kind of a delusion, that they have been probably living in a delusion, and they meet their own tragic sort of ends.
Some poets and writers, talk about that dawn.
Right.
Towards you reach, and this person says, well, there's going to be night.
Right.
So it's going to be dark.
It's a dark play. Most of his plays are dark, and they are seldom about, the great possibilities of America. They are not in the tradition of, say, Whitman and others, Whitman and Emerson, for instance, who talk about this kind of spiritual grand life, or the spiritual tradition of America. In fact, O'Neill wants to also reject this larger spiritual tradition of America. He doesn't believe, he doesn't think that that kind of grand spiritual transcendence is possible today, that Emerson or Whitman could speak about, that kind of, that kind of greatness or that kind of possibilities in America that America stood for, they're no more possible for characters and no more possible for people in the present time, in Eugene O'Neill's time. So I think he's also rejecting that kind of a spiritual framework that was being established or that was established in the 19th century by the stalwarts, of the time, the literary stalwarts.
Would you call it a kind of pessimistic comment on American life at the turn of the century?
It is pessimistic. I cannot deny it. And even though it's awe-inspiring at times, and then it is all nightmarish, and there are apprehensions that you have about the play, and then it also puzzles you at times. So it's not an easy play to really fit in, and it could very easily fit in the pessimistic framework. Some people have also called it nihilistic, but I think it is nihilism only to the extent that it rejects the religious sort of principle as an answer to the situation, even though you find that characters try to latch on to Christianity, for instance. They try to latch on to a kind of resolution, a kind of resolution that could be found through religion. You find that most characters, at least the young characters, find it absolutely redundant, the Christian framework. And the central figure, for instance, in Long Day's Journey into Night, Edmund, who is who's in a way the alter ego of Eugene O'Neill, because the play is very autobiographical, and from his point of view, Edmund's point of view, he actually quotes Nietzsche at one place and suggests that God is dead, and so the idea that the resolution can no more be found in religion and that it is beyond that pale. So I think there is a heightened awareness about one's reality and about helplessness that is at the root of all things at the time.
What about the American Renaissance that was there in the 19th century? Is he reacting to that also?
It is actually, because I think the American Renaissance was very close to the European Renaissance. So while the father, for instance, in Long Day's Journey into Night, believes in the Shakespearean model, and there is a scene towards the end in Act 4, in fact, where the father and the son, Edmund particularly, they're having a conversation, and the father can't understand why he's obsessed with this morbid sort of poetry that he writes. Edmund is also a poet. And so why he writes this kind of morbid stuff, which is to deal with death and despair, and why would he want to read all that when he has a full collection, when the father has a full collection of Shakespeare and all the great things that Shakespeare's read? And he says, when you have Shakespeare, I wonder why would you go to these other poets who only offer you visions of death and desolation? So there is a kind of a vision which the past, which people like, for instance, James Tyner could live with, but it is increasingly becoming impossible for the 20th century generation in America to live with that world and live with that Renaissance point of view that the earlier generation could.
The kind of argument that you are presenting, it's very enlightening for us. Is it a poet's play then?
I think so. It's a poet's play. It's a literary artist's play, you could say, because he also follows in the tradition of, say, Rossetti and the Pre-Raphaelites and Walter Pater. So he's into that that era of decadence, for instance. Also has arts for art's sake kind of thing. So there is a streak of that. You can see that there is aesthetics which he's very conscious of, and he's trying to beautify it in the play, how the play has its own life at the end of the day. And yet you cannot it's not autonomous, it's not just in a vacuum. These characters, or at the end of it, the America or 20th century American theatre try to depict family life as well. Like, for instance, Tennessee Williams talks about family and a kind of a family falling apart. You think of Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. It's all with the relation between the father and son that is again at the center of this play. So So family life, the center being the family life, that sort of continues. And what it has become in the present day, present day as in of Eugene O'Neill, is something that is worth inquiring into, because what is interesting about all these writers is that they are not they're not directly polemical. They are not talking politics. For instance, Eugene O'Neill is farther away. He doesn't even make very broad statements that relate to America, for instance. You would still find Williams talk about the country and America, but O'Neill, while talking about America, is trying to talk about the family, but then he's talking about this larger sort of fear and apprehension that remains in the undercurrent. And especially when he's basing this play, you see, this play is set in 1912. Right, so this is the period that it is set in. So we are looking at the pre-Depression years, but of course it is written in the post-Depression years, around 19. So O'Neill starts writing this play around 1939 and finishes it by 1941. Again, the period of the Second World War as we know it. So he's writing during the war about America that was in 1912. So again, he's basing it on the experience of his own life, and telling us what were the experiences of an ordinary family in America, for instance, in 1912, when he was growing up, when he was still young. So that kind of historical viewpoint is there, and yet I feel that it's not a play that is trying to be polemical, and yet one has to, if you just scrap the surface and you just dig deeper, there is much that you get to see, and which is clearly the tragedy of a family, or the great, I would say, the American tragedy, really, that is being played out in this play and several others of the dramatists.
What I gather from your discussion is that he finds the family in America at that time falling apart.
Yes, relationships, human relationships falling apart, parenthood, also marriage, parenthood, family, whatever human relationships that we speak of. I mean, how do you speak of a human being without ties to other people in that sense? So whatever social relationships, their inability to form new relationships, you see, the fact that, and that was probably also the case in Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. So you see, the young generation's inability to form new social ties, and their inability to hold on to the old ones that they have been living with. So they can't sustain it. I mean, family has ceased to be the healing factor. It no more heals, and it cannot even sustain one another. So the basic function of a family has been, has come to naught in that sense, and new relationships can't be formed. There is one instance in the play when Mary, the mother, really talks to the sons, and she says that, I could never provide you a real family and home, which is why you never knew real women, and you could never develop relationships. All you knew were, these one-night stands that you had with women, or you entered into prostitution, etc. So you never had real relationships. So the idea that even the men in the family, both brothers, that is the young brothers, they're unable to form real relationships with people outside. They don't have friends outside. They don't have girlfriends, for instance. They don't have a social circle. Again, the family as such doesn't have a social circle.
Which means religion, social structures, one's own inner world, they are weakening in the imagination of the author.
Right. There's a sense of loneliness and a deep sense of isolation that each character experiences vis-a-vis one's own life, and the inability to achieve what probably people around them want them to achieve, or what they want to achieve.
You have referred to 1912 as the starting point of this process, that in his mind would have gone into the change that occurred in the 1930s, the Depression years. So is he tracing the decline of life from 1912 when the process started, and finally it crystallized in the form of the Depression? And
it's interesting in the sense that he's talking about 1912, right? So the play is set in 1912, so which means this is far away from the Depression years. It's still the high moment, and America is still becoming great at the time. But because he's writing in 1939, how can we not think that the 1939 would not intrude and intervene in his own memory and would not impact? Of course, he has the advantage.
Wouldn't fall from heaven. It has to connect with the past.
It has to, in the sense that even when the play is set in 1912, should we call it a 1912 play, or should we we call it a 1939 play?
What is your answer?
So the idea is that I think it's a 1939 play, even when he is talking about 1912 in America and the life that he led, because he's looking at it from the position that he holds in 1939 from where he speaks. And as a person, his memory would have played a part, but mostly his viewpoint of his past would have changed also, right? So he's not the same person that he was or he thought he was in 1912. In 1939, as he looks back at his past and his own life and his own parents, then he probably has a maturer view of things. I wouldn't, and not necessarily mature, but I think sympathetic to the characters. And yet there is a larger American life that has seen its course in these 2 decades that have passed, after which he decides to write about his past. Because you see, it's like this sore point, and he mentions it in the dedication to the play. This play is dedicated to his wife, and ironically it is dedicated at his marriage anniversary, 12th marriage anniversary. And because this play is so bleak, and he mentions it, that it's such a dark play, so it's not really a gift to be given to some on your anniversary.
So that dedication is the bright spot.
Yeah, that dedication is the bright spot in the play, you could say that. So in a way, what I'm trying to say here is that this is looking back, coming to terms with one's own past, and being able to distance one's self from the wounds of the past, which would have been sore and would have been fresh at that time. But now, when looked at from a distance of 1939, then they have crystallized and become something else. So that's what I'd
now,
say.
there is one point I'd like to mention here, and that is based on your discussion. You mentioned the year 1912. And within 2 years, the First World War will begin.
Right.
And that will end sometime in 1916, 1917. And then, the depression will be only 10 years away from there. And then, the depression in America would become a part of the Second World War,
Right.
which begins in 1939.
Right.
And the play is written around that time.
Right.
So from First World War to Second World War, there's no hope, left in humankind.
Right.
And one didn't learn the right kind of lessons from the destruction and devastation of the First World War.
But what is also interesting is that as a writer, or as I would say somebody who can look into the future, he's able to see that when he's projecting a picture of 1912, because you see, it's just a day in an August day in 1912 that he's depicting in this play, and you can already see the tragedy there. You can already see people are unable to sustain themselves. They have really become mad and hysterical in their own ways. And there are drunkards towards the end of the play. For instance, that all 3 male in the family, they're into alcohol. They're alcoholics. They're drinking one after another, and they can't deal with reality anymore. So there is a sense that reality is too daunting for them to deal with. So it's not something that requires a depression really to take forward. Depression perhaps was it's like a ticking bomb, really, I think, and depression was the moment when it exploded. But you can already see the germ of it here in this. The people are deeply, it's not, I mean, happy, would be a very soft word. People are deeply disturbed in their surroundings and with their own selves, with their own family. And maybe that is also the case, not just limited to America, but also in Europe. That is the phenomena elsewhere. So also, because you mentioned in the beginning, what is his nationality got to do? He's an Irish American, So in that sense, he has the advantage also of an outsider who doesn't really gel and who's not able to become, for instance, the real American. And the American narrative of of greatness and of a land of possibilities is something that of not belonging to that place entirely. So they are always seen as outsiders, for instance, even in their own neighborhood, where they live. It's a summer house where the family unites for a brief period of time, and before they go back to their own lives. So it's that moment where they come together. But again, vis-a-vis other people around them, they are Irish Americans, and the father is a very proud Irishman, and there is a kind of a dialect that they show. There is this lilt, which is the Irish lilt, which is visible uncle, for instance, or in the tone of the mother. And so, I think as for Eugene also, Eugene O'Neill, there is this quality of being an outsider while being in America, and therefore not believing in that jingoism that was being parceled to Americans at the time of that progressive nation that it was meant to be. So I think that kind of advantage he has, that vantage point of an outsider, helps him in that sense to look at things in a more objective, distanced manner.
My some kind of a prejudice with respect to the Irish people is that they are genetically structured to remain agonized and anguished. And they can't be happy. Bernard Shaw, W.B. Yeats at this time, then Swift in the 18th century. All these Irish writers who come from Ireland, they are angry people. So does he represent that kind of anger?
See, I think, in fact, Harold Bloom mentions that, O'Neill is very different from, say, a Shavian kind of character, right? Like, there is this stubbornness of the Irish that is there in his characters, the stubborn character and fortitude that you see in them, and the will to be able to find their place. So all those things are there. But unlike, for instance, Shaw's character, who has a sense of positive dimension to this will, Eugene O'Neill's characters don't really carry that kind of an optimistic will that generally you would, even when they are disturbed, there is a sense of a kind of optimism in Shaw, perhaps because there is some humor or there is some sense of perseverance, I'd say. Here, characters break apart. Here, characters are unable to hold on to things. So there is, even though there is this stubbornness and that kind of Irish quality and anguish, as you say, and agony, it is also pessimistic to some extent. And in some cases, for instance, in some characters, it is cynical as well.
So friends, in this part of the discussion, we have gone into the processes of the making of a dramatist in the early years of the 20th century, as Professor Bajaj has traced his evolution from the early 20th century, the 1900, up to the 1940 when the play was written, conceived and conceptualized. So the other part of the discussion that will follow this is going to be focused more sharply on the text of the play. Thank you.